Welcome to Boundless B, the Hemophilia B podcast, the podcast standing with you from a family like yours, presented by the Coalition for Hemophilia B and in partnership with Balancing Life's Issues. In a time when science is advancing faster than ever and information is just a click away, it's easy for patients and families affected by Hemophilia B to find themselves overwhelmed or even misled. When you're navigating a complex condition, trying to understand new therapies, or advocating for care, getting accurate, science-based information is absolutely critical. That's why today's guest is so important. Erik Paulsen understands not only the power of medical innovation, but also the inner workings and the frustrations of government. As a former congressman and now chairman of the Institute for Gene Therapies, he's uniquely positioned to help bridge the gap between cutting-edge treatments and the policies that make them accessible. He's here today to talk about how we ensure the right voices, those grounded in research, facts, and patient experience, are the ones help shaping the future. Erik, welcome to Boundless B.
Well, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And you spent a decade in Congress, so I just want to start there. That's a really long time to be in Congress. Can you give us a little sneak peek about what that time was like?
Yeah, and challenging times to be sure, but I will say this, that one thing that I did during my tenure in Congress is that I was always a passionate advocate for medical innovation and the life-improving and life-saving technologies that were being made available for patients. So I co-chaired the Medical Technology Caucus. I served on several different committees that had jurisdictions over healthcare, and that kind of gave me a front row seat, an opportunity to make a difference, advocating for some, different policies to foster advances in healthcare. But I really did enjoy my meetings with constituents and their patients and their families who came to Capitol Hill for meetings, especially during Rare Disease Week, that would share their personal stories or perspectives. So, while I always had that opportunity to be a champion for new life sciences and innovation, it was those interactions, I think, that really guided me and some of my staff with an extra purpose to engage and advocate on behalf of patients. And now I get to do that in a new role at the Institute of Gene Therapies, which is really exciting after I left Congress.
A lot of the reason we're here is because you help bring to light these stories that end up, does it create empathy? Does it help create emotional intelligence to people who are resistant to helping get these advances in medicine to the people who need it? Like, you talk to us more about how you bringing those stories to life has helped.
Yeah, there's no doubt. From a personal motivation perspective, rare disease patients and the stories, and they were constituents, right? They shared their personal side, and I think having engagements with those types of different stakeholders and then bringing all those different voices together just kind of helped, coalesce sort of an interest or a motivation to continue helping, this new frontier of medicine, if you will, in a different way. And this is where, when I look at gene therapies, I kind of look at where we are right now in that field, kind of where medical devices were 3 decades ago. So we're sort of at the infancy, but a very exciting stage, for hemophilia B patients, but also a lot of different rare disease patients, which is exciting.
Yeah, but just to clarify, at the Institute of Gene Therapies where you are now, is it only about hemophilia B, or is it about all kinds of gene therapies?
All kinds of therapies. And I'll just tell you, about our mission essentially, but there's lots of, neuromuscular diseases. There's 10,000 different rare diseases, right? That a lot of patients have. Some are ultra rare diseases, but, we were created and started up at the Institute 5 years ago. It's been an exciting time over a 5-year period because we've seen numerous gene therapy approvals in that time frame, including inherited blindness, right? That has a new therapy for it. We've had policy initiatives advanced during our time now as an organization. And so, our mission has been now really working to ensure that the healthcare system and the policies around healthcare are keeping up to speed with the science of gene therapies. And so we can maximize the potential of gene therapies by modernizing the regulatory system, the reimbursement frameworks, so that patients are ultimately able to realize this new promise. And that's really important, again, as I mentioned, in this frontier of medicine.
Yeah. And if we could take a step back, because I think for a lot of people, it's about simplifying this process. Is there anything to be said about navigating healthcare? It could be challenging. It'd be very confusing, and there's jargon and there's semantics you just don't understand. So is that part of the work that you do?
Well, I think part of the work comes into place there when we work with our different advisory councils. And so think of our patient advocacy advisory council, for instance, and it's those patients and there's organizations such as, the Hemophilia B, coalition, but we also have individual parents and their family perspectives that are members of our patient advisory council. And those perspectives and stories bring sort of the real life component of the challenges that are out there, the value that needs to be focused on in terms of opportunities and with reforming and modifying our healthcare system and making progress along those fronts. So we are the most impactful when we are centered around sort of the patient needs and efforts and stories and experiences that motivate and drive us and our other members.
Are there any specific stories that kind of leap to mind when you say that?
Well, we have Capitol Hill briefings, for instance, that we try to bring in a patient perspective periodically to educate policymakers. And, we had someone recently who was the parent of a Duchenne child. And there was not a dry eye in the audience of different congressional staff after hearing some of the stories and challenges that this family had faced, but also the hope that a new therapy was bringing for change for this family and the opportunity to really bring a value in a different way. And again, these are new, exciting treatments that are being approved by the FDA, but that also means that there are regulatory and other policy hurdles that have to be addressed and identified and dealt with to make sure that these hopes are actually realized.
When it comes to making sure these hopes are realized, I mean, this feels like a very strange time in this administration, and especially when it comes to like cuts, budgetary things. I guess from your perspective, from your years in Congress and where you sit today, is there a message of hope around stories from patients, like being able to affect what's happening in Congress in a positive direction to get families the care they need?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things here. I will say number one is that we're blessed to have very good bipartisan policymakers on both sides of the aisle that are engaged in this space, that are learning the value of gene therapies and what that means to patients. And that all comes, I think, from the grassroots involvement of folks that come to Capitol Hill. Again, these are constituents, right? And policymakers want to help their constituents. I think once there's an education level with these different stakeholder groups and others that engage with policymakers, and especially those patient stories, some of these folks want to become leaders in this field. And so we've had various pieces of legislation introduced. We've had advocates with the first Trump administration, the Biden administration, and now the second Trump administration. So again, very bipartisan background and support, which again, helps realize the hope. So again, I'm optimistic. I think one of the challenges that we do see also is that we want to make sure there's continued research and development in this space, right? Which means investment at the NIH, for instance, National Institutes of Health. We want to make sure that, if there are reductions that are happening in government spending, that those are carefully targeted and that we're able to be lean and mean, but we're not cutting our nose off to spite our face, essentially, right? That we're actually going to be able to continue the innovation here in the United States, here at home, become FDA approved, and then move forward with treatments.
Yeah. And I guess could we talk about advocacy for a second? Because I think for a lot of people, it's a scary word. And maybe for, the overwhelmed parent with so much else going on, it might feel like going to Capitol Hill is not an option. So can you talk to us a little bit about what advocacy means to you and how you've seen it work from as simple as writing a letter to actually being on Capitol Hill speaking to Congress?
Yeah, I mean, advocacy, again, this is part of, when I think of our Patient Advocacy Advisory Council, for instance, and in organizations like Hemophilia B and others that have grassroots organizations. So number one, as we mentioned before, patient stories are essential because those are real life experiences. And for elected officials and policymakers helping their constituents, those are huge opportunities. Letters, phone calls, emails, those are all impactful. You don't have to take the time to fly to Washington to have a visit with your member of Congress on Capitol Hill. You can also ask for a visit, though, in the home district office. You'll often find those staff members at home or the legislative official when they're back in their district, very willing to meet on hand in the home district. So lots of opportunities to engage, and there should be no hesitation about having a personal voice shared with a member of Congress, for instance, or a local state legislator, advocating for newborn screening and some of these initiatives at the state level, because it can absolutely be very impactful because ultimately these policymakers want to be helping their constituents.
Can you recall a moment in your tenure where your mind was changed in a certain direction because of these letters you got or these phone calls that you got or people who came to your office in to advocate for something?
Well, I will say this is that on a regular basis, I would ask my staff to keep track of different tallies of, what are we hearing about today? Are there certain issues we're hearing about from constituents? Because, there could be a news story that's driving a lot of attention, right, with phone calls or letters or emails. But I do remember one experience in particular that was with a rare disease patient that I never expected to get involved in. And this was someone who actually came to visit me who was suffering from pulmonary fibrosis, a special disease of the lungs where there's no known treatment, no known cure. And his ask or request is like, hey, we should make sure that the National Institute of Health is creating a registry to collect data on all the different patients that have this disease, because it actually is very prominent, as much killing as many people as breast cancer. And so we need more focus and attention on this. So that prompted me to say, hey, we should be introducing legislation. I got some bipartisan authors. We got House and Senate engaged, and we were able to make some progress and drive some attention on this. So that's one story that I never expected to come across or to actually engage in on the legislative level. But it was meaningful and impactful because I was able to help someone and move something forward.
Cool. And I just want our listeners to hear that. Our congressmen, are people with families at the end of the day, and they need to hear from you, though, in order to make sure, especially for the voices of the hemophilia B community, that the policies and all of these kinds of things are shifting in a favorable direction. And I guess if you could just speak a little bit to maybe what are some of the major hurdles you're facing right now when it comes to access to gene therapy, and just to make sure patients can begin to benefit from the treatments.
Yeah, the very nature of gene therapies, makes for some unique challenges with our traditional regulatory paradigms that exist out there, because these are treatments that are relatively new, they're relatively incredibly unique. They're potential one-time treatments that can have long-lasting benefits for both patients and the healthcare system alike. So we do need to be rethinking our policy and our regulatory landscape. So that means our current reimbursement system, for example, is not really set up to accommodate the influx of these new therapies that are currently going through the FDA approval process, and that impacts patient access. So we've also seen threats to the FDA's accelerated approval pathway, for instance, and the coverage of treatments that move through that process. And that's critical for the development of these new gene therapies because of all these different variables across disease populations that gene therapies can benefit and can provide benefit, and the unique benchmarks of these therapies themselves. And let me take a step back here, too, because I do think one of the biggest priorities and hurdles that we face in general is also ensuring that all policymakers and regulators and even the general public understand, again, this unique value of gene therapies, because we have an opportunity, knowing that chronic disease and illness consumes about 85 cents of every healthcare dollar. When you manage these symptoms and chronic illnesses over a patient's lifetime, we've really got an opportunity now to disrupt that whole process with gene therapies. And so you might have an expensive treatment right up front, but if you have something that lasts a lifetime for a cure or potential treatment, you can improve and save lives for patients, but you can also be saving our healthcare system a lot of money down the road. So that's the excitement and the opportunity, I think, across the board.
Yeah. And I guess, are there some general myths that we could bust here for a couple minutes in terms of gene therapy? Because I know, especially for the hemophilia B community, there are things like abstinence and alcohol use kind of are some of the hesitations for people to look at that therapy as a possible treatment.
In general, it's always important for patients to be talking individually with their physician, with their doctor, with their care providers, to work through all of the backgrounds and steps to take if this is a therapy that would make sense for them, right? And so I know at the Hemophilia B Coalition, at the symposium, for instance, that just took place in Orlando, where I had an opportunity to join patients and a lot of providers there, is that there was a special panel between a gene therapy doctor and a patient there. And it was a great give and take about how this patient understood and went through the process of getting a new treatment. Not sure if this was going to be the right step at first, but in that consultation with the healthcare providers that served this patient, it made sense. And it might not be for everybody, but it is something you can work through a lot of those myths or challenges or caution challenges with by having those types of conversations up front.
Yeah, and I think just another shout out to the symposium and any event that the Coalition for Hemophilia B puts on, because those are opportunities to connect directly with people who are going through these therapies, who are going through these treatments and are on the kind of the cutting edge of the new treatments out there. Because I think you're absolutely right. I think I was at that same breakout session as you, and just hearing the stories from these, from these people whose lives have been transformed because of advances in science and medicine it's just so inspiring. But it does take that effort to to go to those things, right? To invest in the education with the community. And I think going back to the idea of advocacy, like educating yourself on these things is a form of that. Can you speak a little bit to like education and the Coalition for Hemophilia B?
Well, in education, I mean, it comes from just, engaging with your podcast, right? And just taking the time to listen and hear new perspectives and stories that other patients of similar situations are going through, for instance, right? And so that's one thing I've observed by attending some of these various symposiums with patients of different rare diseases is that there's a commonality and there's some different experiences, obviously, but there's also a huge support group that can be brought together that can kind of lift people up. And so I guess that's one of the exciting components of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you so much for your time today. I know you're very busy, and the coalition is very grateful for your time and your energy and your effort. And I guess if just maybe to round this out, what gives you hope right now, given the current landscape?
Yeah, again, as I sort of said earlier, I think the future is bright. I think the science is really exciting. We've got multiple new gene therapy approvals that are expected each and every year. We've got bipartisan support in Congress, which is good. We've got legislative initiatives right now that are moving forward. The MVP Act, bipartisan support, Accelerated Care for Kids Act that is moving forward with bipartisan support. So we've got good legislative initiatives that have been introduced. And we've got more and more policymakers through the Personalized Medicine Caucus and others that have sponsored some of our briefings on Capitol Hill. So I'm really optimistic, but it ultimately means that the grassroots that comes from our patient organizations is going to help to continue to move this forward. And so for all of your listeners, please visit our website at gene-therapies.org to learn more about what we do at IGT. And we're excited to stay active with different social media channels with you and others. And so that engagement is really key to success.
So, well, thank you so much. And again, a shout out to advocacy. Does not have to be scary. It could be as easy as visiting gene-therapies.org or the Coalition for Hemophilia B website and go to the community section to see how you can get involved. Share your stories and let Erik and the Institute for Gene Therapy be able to uplift your voice in this community. So thank you again so much for your time today, Erik.
Sounds good. Really enjoyed our conversation. Look forward to staying in touch in the future.
Fantastic. All right, everybody, take care. This has been a production of Balancing Life's Issues, produced by me, Kai. Follow along with other BLI produced shows at balancinglifesissues.com. Got an idea for the show? Email me, Kai, at balancinglifesissues.com. And be sure to follow and subscribe to this show wherever you listen to podcasts. Anything else to add, Miles? This episode of Boundless B, the Hemophilia B podcast, presented by the Coalition for Hemophilia B, is made possible in part by the support of CSL. We thank CSL for their continued commitment to the bleeding disorders community.